Some promises are so heavy that they can wait a lifetime, but they never stop asking to be fulfilled. Olivia Brooks had imagined her wedding day 1,000 different ways when she was younger. In every version, there had been laughter, familiar faces, and someone waiting for her at the end of the aisle whose smile would calm every fear she carried. None of those dreams survived the phone call she received 72 hours earlier. Now she stood alone inside a quiet bridal suite overlooking the gray Seattle waterfront, staring at her own reflection as strangers adjusted the ivory fabric around her shoulders with practiced silence. The expensive gown felt less like a celebration and more like a carefully tailored uniform. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, cold rain drifted across Elliott Bay, turning the skyline into a watercolor of silver and steel. Olivia barely noticed. Her hands trembled as she stared at the unsigned marriage certificate resting on a polished walnut table. Her full name had already been printed beside a space waiting for her signature. The groom's name remained covered beneath a folded sheet of paper. No photographs, no introduction, no conversation. Just a legal agreement that had somehow become the price of saving what remained of her family. 3 months earlier, Olivia had still believed hard work could solve almost anything. She spent long days caring for elderly residents at a nursing home, working double shifts without complaint, always carrying an extra smile for people whose own families rarely visited. She never expected luxury. She never chased attention. She simply wanted enough money to help her younger brother finish college and to keep the tiny house where they had grown up. Then everything collapsed faster than she could understand. Medical bills, overdue loans left behind by the man who had raised them, and a chain of legal notices arrived like an endless storm. Every door she knocked on closed before she finished explaining. Every bank declined another request. Every promise from friends dissolved into uncomfortable silence. Then someone offered a solution that sounded too impossible to believe. Marry a man she had never met, and every debt would disappear before sunset. At first, she laughed. Then she cried. Eventually, she stopped doing either. A soft knock interrupted the silence. An older woman dressed in charcoal gray stepped inside, carrying a small velvet folder. She wasn't smiling. She looked more like someone delivering a verdict than preparing a bride. "Miss Brooks," she said gently, "it's time." Olivia swallowed hard before following her through endless marble hallways lined with priceless paintings and quiet security guards whose expressions never changed. Every polished surface reflected the same uncomfortable truth. She didn't belong here. The elevator descended without a sound until the doors opened to a private entrance where nearly 100 men in dark suits already stood waiting in perfect rows despite the steady rain. None of them spoke. None of them glanced toward her. Their discipline felt almost unreal. Then a line of black luxury vehicles rolled through the iron gates. Every man straightened instantly. Every conversation disappeared. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Olivia watched the center car stop beside the entrance. A chauffeur hurried forward before anyone else could move. The rear door opened slowly. First came a polished black cane. Then an elderly man stepped into the rain wearing an immaculate charcoal overcoat tailored with impossible precision. His silver hair was neatly combed back. His posture remained perfectly straight despite his age. Deep lines marked his face, but his dark eyes carried the calm confidence of someone who had spent decades making decisions no one dared question. Even before anyone addressed him, everyone around Olivia lowered their heads with absolute respect. The woman beside Olivia leaned closer and spoke so quietly it was almost lost beneath the rain. "Miss Brooks, your husband has arrived." Olivia forced herself to breathe. Her heartbeat pounded inside her ears as the elderly stranger slowly approached without rushing, his measured footsteps echoing across the stone courtyard. He finally stopped only a few feet away and studied her with quiet dignity rather than ownership. There was no arrogance in his expression. No triumph, only an exhausting sadness that seemed far older than 74 years. Olivia searched his face, hoping to find some explanation hidden behind those unreadable eyes. But before she could speak, the attorney opened the velvet folder and read the final detail she had never been told. The groom is William Carter, 74 years old, head of the Carter Organization, born in Busan, South Korea. Every sound around her disappeared. The rain, the distant harbor, even her own breathing faded into silence. Olivia's knees nearly gave way as tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She wasn't crying because of his age. She wasn't crying because he was one of the most powerful men she had ever heard whispered about. She was crying because, for the first time since this nightmare began, she realized it was all real. Olivia could not remember signing the marriage certificate. She remembered the fountain pen resting between her trembling fingers, the faint scent of polished cedar filling the private chamber, and the quiet voice of the attorney explaining every page with careful precision. But the exact moment her signature touched the paper disappeared beneath the weight of disbelief. William Carter signed immediately afterward without hesitation, his handwriting elegant and steady despite hands marked by nearly 8 decades of life. He did not reach for her hand. He did not offer empty words of reassurance. He simply inclined his head with quiet respect before stepping aside to allow the documents to be collected. The ceremony lasted less than 15 minutes. There were no musicians, no applause, and no celebration. When it ended, everyone present bowed toward William before disappearing as silently as they had arrived, leaving Olivia standing in the enormous reception hall beneath crystal chandeliers that reflected soft golden light across imported marble floors. She had expected photographers, extravagant speeches, or at least an announcement worthy of one of the wealthiest men on the West Coast. Instead, the mansion became strangely peaceful, almost lonely, as though the wedding had been nothing more than another appointment on an impossibly long calendar. A housekeeper in a navy uniform approached with a warm smile that felt surprisingly genuine. "Mrs. Carter, if you would please follow me. Your room has been prepared." The title caught Olivia completely off guard. Mrs. Carter. The words sounded unfamiliar, belonging to someone she had never met. She followed the woman through corridors lined with Korean artwork, antique clocks, and family portraits stretching back generations. The mansion combined modern American architecture with traditional Korean elegance, creating an atmosphere unlike anywhere Olivia had ever visited. Every room seemed designed to preserve memories instead of displaying wealth. Fresh orchids rested on carved wooden tables. Sunlight filtered through enormous windows overlooking evergreen gardens where carefully shaped pine trees stood beside quiet stone paths. It was breathtaking, but something about the house felt frozen, as though time itself had chosen not to move forward. The housekeeper opened double doors leading into a spacious suite overlooking a private lake. Soft cream walls, shelves filled with classic novels, fresh flowers arranged beside the windows, and a grand piano occupied one corner of the room. Nothing about it resembled the luxurious bedroom Olivia had imagined for the wife of a powerful man. It felt peaceful, personal, comfortable. "If you need anything, please let us know," the housekeeper said. "Dinner is served every evening at 6 o'clock. Mr. Carter prefers everyone to eat together whenever possible." Olivia blinked. "Together?" The woman nodded. "Yes, ma'am. He believes no one should eat alone." Before Olivia could ask another question, the housekeeper quietly excused herself, leaving only silence behind. Olivia slowly explored the room, opening drawers and closets that had already been filled with clothing in her exact size. Someone had somehow learned her favorite colors. Soft earth tones, deep blue sweaters, comfortable shoes instead of expensive heels. Even the books placed beside the bed reflected subjects she genuinely loved, including nursing, history, poetry, and biographies of remarkable women. None of it made sense. This was not the behavior of a stranger arranging a political marriage. This was the careful preparation of someone who had spent months learning about another person's ordinary life. Her thoughts were interrupted by a gentle knock. A younger staff member entered carrying a small wooden box. "Mr. Carter asked me to deliver this after the ceremony." Olivia carefully lifted the lid. Inside rested a simple silver key attached to a handwritten note. She unfolded it slowly. The handwriting matched the signature she had watched only minutes earlier. "This key opens every door in this home except one. You will never need permission to go anywhere. I only ask that you trust time before you judge me." Olivia read the message twice, then a third time. She had prepared herself for strict rules, constant supervision, and endless expectations. Instead, she had been handed freedom. She walked toward the window, turning the small silver key between her fingers while watching evening sunlight settle across the gardens below. In the distance, She noticed William walking alone along a narrow stone path beside the lake. His pace was slow but steady, his cane tapping gently against the ground. He stopped beneath an old maple tree and remained perfectly still for several long moments, looking toward a separate building hidden beyond flowering hedges. He did not enter. He simply stood there, shoulders slightly lowered beneath the fading light, carrying an expression so quietly sorrowful that Olivia felt an unexpected ache in her own heart. For the first time since this impossible marriage began, fear gave way to something entirely different. Curiosity. The first morning inside the Carter estate began with silence so complete that Olivia woke before sunrise simply because she was no longer accustomed to hearing traffic outside her window. She stood barefoot beside the glass, watching thin ribbons of mist drift across the private lake while the eastern sky slowly filled with pale shades of blue and gold. The mansion felt less like the headquarters of one of the most influential men on the West Coast, and more like an isolated sanctuary hidden from the restless world beyond its gates. She, dressed in a simple cream sweater and dark slacks chosen from the wardrobe someone had prepared for her, still wondering how a stranger had known her exact size, her favorite colors, and even the type of shoes that would leave her feet comfortable after hours of walking. The unanswered questions followed her downstairs where the aroma of fresh coffee and warm bread floated through the quiet halls. A long dining table had been arranged for two, yet only one chair was occupied. William Carter sat at the far end reading a newspaper with thin gold-framed glasses resting low on his nose. Morning sunlight softened the silver in his hair and revealed the deep lines around his eyes, not as signs of weakness, but as the quiet record of a life that had carried more responsibility than comfort. When he noticed Olivia approaching, he folded the newspaper immediately and rose to his feet before she could reach the table. The gesture surprised her so much that she almost stopped walking. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," he said with a gentle nod. "I hope you slept well." His voice was calm, measured, and free from the commanding tone she expected from a man whose name carried so much influence. "I did," Olivia answered carefully. "Thank you." William waited until she had taken her seat before sitting again himself. No servants hovered nearby. No one poured their coffee. Instead, he lifted the porcelain pot himself and quietly filled her cup before serving his own. The small act unsettled her more than intimidation ever could. Nothing about this marriage followed the expectations she had prepared herself to survive. Breakfast passed with only simple conversation. He asked whether she preferred tea or coffee, whether the room temperature had been comfortable, and whether she enjoyed reading. He never asked about the debts that had brought her there. He never mentioned the agreement that had changed both of their lives. It was as though he understood she needed time before answering questions she had not yet asked herself. After breakfast, William excused himself for what he called his daily meetings. Olivia wandered through the mansion, discovering a library larger than the entire first floor of her childhood home. Thousands of carefully organized books filled floor-to-ceiling shelves, many of them marked with handwritten notes tucked between their pages. She noticed biographies of civil rights leaders beside Korean history, medical journals beside collections of American poetry. Nothing reflected the image newspapers painted of a ruthless businessman. Every room suggested curiosity instead of pride. Near the rear hallway, she met Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, the estate manager, who had served the Carter family for more than 30 years. Eleanor carried herself with quiet confidence and spoke with the warmth of someone who had watched generations grow older beneath the same roof. As they strolled through the conservatory filled with blooming orchids, Olivia finally gathered enough courage to ask the question that had followed her since the wedding. What kind of man is William Carter when no one is watching? Eleanor smiled thoughtfully before answering. The newspapers write about his influence. Business rivals speak about his discipline. Politicians respect his judgment. Those stories are not entirely wrong, but they are incomplete. Mr. Carter believes power means very little if it cannot protect someone weaker than yourself. Olivia listened without interrupting. Eleanor continued walking slowly among the flowers. He built hospitals that never carry his name. He funds scholarships without accepting recognition. Every Christmas, he personally visits the retirement homes supported by his foundation because he says loneliness is the only poverty that money cannot erase. Olivia frowned slightly. Then why does everyone seem afraid of him? Eleanor stopped beside a blooming white camellia and looked toward the lake beyond the glass walls. Because people often fear those they do not understand. Mr. Carter learned many years ago that kindness shown publicly is often mistaken for weakness. So he allows the world to believe what it wishes while quietly doing what he believes is right. Before Olivia could ask another question, a grandfather clock echoed through the hallway. Eleanor's gentle expression softened even further. There is only one place in this house where he asks never to be disturbed, she whispered. Every evening at exactly 7 o'clock, he walks alone to the east garden. He remains there for 1 hour without fail. Not because anyone orders him to. Because he made a promise he has never broken. Olivia instinctively reached into her pocket and touched the small silver key William had given her the day before. For the first time since entering the Carter estate, she realized the greatest mystery inside the mansion was not hidden behind a locked door. It was quietly walking through the halls in plain sight. That evening, the grandfather clock in the main hall chimed 7 slow notes that echoed through the mansion with almost ceremonial precision. Olivia looked up from the novel resting in her lap and remembered Eleanor's quiet warning. Every evening at exactly 7 o'clock. Every evening without fail. Curiosity settled into her thoughts long before she realized she had already risen from the sofa. She slipped the silver key into her pocket out of habit, though she still had not found a single locked door anywhere inside the estate. As she stepped into the hallway, she noticed William already walking toward the eastern wing with the same measured pace he carried everywhere else. His cane touched the polished hardwood floor with a soft rhythm that somehow blended into the silence rather than disturbing it. He never looked behind him. He never checked whether anyone followed. He simply continued forward as though guided by a destination older than memory itself. Olivia kept a respectful distance, careful not to intrude, yet unable to ignore the quiet mystery that surrounded the man everyone believed they understood. William stepped through a pair of glass doors leading into the gardens, where carefully trimmed hedges framed winding stone paths beneath towering maple trees. The fading sunlight painted everything in warm amber tones while a gentle breeze carried the scent of jasmine across the grounds. The farther he walked, the quieter the estate became until only birds settling into the evening and distant water moving across the lake could be heard. Finally, he reached a small building tucked behind flowering dogwoods. It was not grand like the mansion. It resembled a modest garden cottage built from weathered cedar with a single porch light glowing softly above the entrance. William stopped several feet away. He removed his hat, lowered his head, and remained perfectly still. Minutes passed without movement. Olivia watched from behind a nearby oak tree, surprised to see the powerful businessman standing with the quiet humility of someone visiting sacred ground. Then something unexpected happened. William smiled. It was not the reserved smile he had offered during breakfast or the polite expression he showed employees. This smile carried tenderness mixed with sorrow, as though he were greeting someone who could no longer answer. His lips moved almost imperceptibly, speaking words too distant for Olivia to hear. After several moments, he reached inside his overcoat and placed a single white lily on the porch before turning away just as slowly as he had arrived. He never entered the building. He simply walked back toward the mansion, disappearing between the trees until only the fading sound of his cane remained. Olivia stayed where she was, her heartbeat growing louder with every unanswered question. When she was certain William had gone, she cautiously approached the cottage. The porch had been swept perfectly clean. The flower rested beside the door with careful precision, as though every placement mattered. She instinctively reached for the silver key inside her pocket before stopping herself. William had trusted her with freedom throughout the estate, yet Eleanor had spoken of one place connected to a promise. Respect mattered more than curiosity. Olivia stepped back from the door and noticed something she had almost missed. Beside one of the windows stood an old wooden bench facing the lake. Time had softened the edges of its polished surface, but a small brass plaque remained untouched. She knelt to read the engraved words. They were simple. There was no name, no date, only a single sentence. Promises outlive the people who make them. Olivia read the inscription again, feeling an unexpected heaviness settle over her heart. Whoever had inspired those words had clearly changed William's life in ways no newspaper had ever reported. As she stood, a gentle voice interrupted the silence behind her. Most people spend their lives trying to forget painful memories, Eleanor said quietly. Mr. Carter chose to remember his every single day. Olivia turned, startled that she had not heard the estate manager approach. Eleanor looked toward the cottage with familiar affection rather than sadness. Has anyone ever gone inside? Olivia asked softly. Eleanor smiled, though there was unmistakable emotion in her eyes. Not for many years. Does he keep it locked? Eleanor slowly shook her head. No, the door has never been locked. Olivia frowned in confusion. Then why has nobody entered? Eleanor looked directly at her before answering with quiet certainty. Because some rooms are protected by respect instead of keys. Olivia glanced back toward the cottage as the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the lake. The silver key remained warm in her hand, yet for the first time she understood that the greatest barriers inside the Carter estate could never be opened with metal. They could only be opened when the truth was finally ready to reveal itself. The days that followed settled into a rhythm so peaceful that Olivia often caught herself forgetting how impossible her new life truly was. Every morning William shared breakfast with her before leaving for meetings that rarely lasted beyond late afternoon. Every evening they sat across from one another at the long dining table, speaking about books, music, medicine, and the changing weather rather than business or the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. He never treated her like an obligation. He never spoke to her with authority simply because they were married. If anything, he listened more than he talked, asking thoughtful questions about her years as a nursing assistant and the elderly residents whose stories she still remembered by heart. One evening she described an 89-year-old retired schoolteacher who insisted on reading poetry aloud every Thursday despite slowly losing her eyesight. William smiled warmly, before quietly reciting the final lines of the same poem from memory. Olivia stared at him in surprise. You know Emily Dickinson? She asked. William chuckled softly. A wise friend once told me that poetry reminds people there is always another way to see the world. He said nothing more, but the familiar sadness briefly returned to his eyes before disappearing behind another sip of tea. The staff treated Olivia with effortless respect, never because she carried the Carter name, but because William clearly expected everyone inside the estate to value kindness above status. She noticed gardeners eating lunch beside accountants, chauffeurs laughing with chefs, and every employee addressed by name rather than title. There was no fear inside the household, only discipline balanced by quiet dignity. It contradicted every rumor she had ever heard about the man the world believed they knew. Nearly 2 weeks passed before Olivia finally asked a question that had lingered in her mind since the wedding. They were walking through the gardens after dinner beneath strings of soft lanterns reflecting across the lake when she gathered enough courage to speak. May I ask you something personal? William slowed his pace and nodded. Of course. Olivia hesitated for a moment. Why did you choose separate bedrooms? William looked toward the water before answering. Because trust should never be rushed. His voice remained calm and sincere. A marriage built on obligation already asks too much from two strangers. The least I can offer is the freedom to feel safe inside your own home. Olivia absorbed his words in silence. She had prepared herself for countless uncomfortable possibilities before arriving at the estate, but she had never imagined being treated with such consistent consideration. William continued walking. You have already sacrificed enough without surrendering your peace as well. She looked at him carefully. Do you ever regret this decision? He smiled faintly. Every day I regret that circumstances forced it to happen this way. His answer raised more questions than it resolved, yet Olivia sensed he had spoken with complete honesty. As they reached the stone bridge crossing a narrow stream, William suddenly stopped. An elderly groundskeeper was struggling to carry several heavy flower pots across the path. Before the man could notice, William handed his cane to Olivia and quietly walked over to lift the largest container himself. The groundskeeper looked embarrassed and apologized repeatedly, but William only laughed. You have spent 20 years making these gardens beautiful, he said. Allow me 5 minutes to return the favor. Olivia watched the exchange in astonishment. There were no cameras, no guests, no audience waiting to praise his generosity. It was simply the natural way he chose to treat another human being. Later that night, Olivia found herself unable to sleep. The unanswered questions had become heavier instead of lighter. She wrapped a light sweater around her shoulders and wandered through the quiet halls until she reached the library. Moonlight spilled across polished shelves while a single reading lamp remained illuminated beside William's favorite chair. Resting on the table was an open history book, a pair of glasses, and a leather bookmark decorated with pressed white lily petals. As she carefully closed the book, something slipped onto the floor. It was an old photograph, faded around the edges from years of careful handling. Olivia picked it up slowly. The picture showed a much younger William standing beside a smiling black woman beneath a bright summer sky. She appeared to be in her late 20s, wearing a simple denim jacket and holding a paper cup of coffee while laughing at something beyond the camera. William looked decades younger, and for the first time she saw genuine joy instead of quiet sorrow on his face. There was no caption, no date, nothing to explain who she was or why the photograph had been hidden inside a favorite book. Olivia turned the picture over, expecting it to be blank, but in neat handwriting, she found only 6 carefully written words. Some debts cannot be measured by money. She stared at the sentence for a long moment before gently returning the photograph exactly where she had found it, never realizing that the woman smiling from that faded image had already shaped her own life long before she was ever born. The following afternoon arrived wrapped in gentle rain that painted tiny circles across the surface of the lake. William had left early for a series of meetings in San Francisco, promising he would return before dinner if traffic cooperated. Olivia spent the morning helping the kitchen staff prepare care packages that the Carter Foundation delivered every Friday to several retirement communities across Washington. No reporters arrived to photograph the donations. No company logos decorated the neatly packed boxes. Everything was done quietly, almost anonymously, as though kindness itself deserved privacy. By mid-afternoon, the rain had grown steadier, encouraging everyone indoors. Olivia wandered back toward the library, hoping to continue the history book she had discovered the previous evening. As she reached the reading table, she noticed the leather bookmark was no longer tucked inside the pages. Instead, a folded envelope rested beneath William's glasses with her name written across the front in careful handwriting. She hesitated before opening it, uncertain whether it had been intentionally left behind. Inside was only a brief note. If you are reading this, then you have probably already found the photograph. Some stories should never be discovered through suspicion. They should be uncovered through patience. When the right day comes, I will answer every question myself. Until then, I ask only one favor. Please do not let curiosity become heavier than trust. Olivia folded the letter slowly, surprised that William somehow knew exactly what she had seen. There was no accusation in his words, only quiet understanding. As she returned the note to its envelope, a gust of wind swept through an open window, scattering several loose papers from a nearby writing desk onto the hardwood floor. She hurried to collect them before they drifted farther across the room. Most were ordinary correspondence, but one yellow document caught her attention because it had clearly been written decades earlier. Across the top appeared the logo of a small community hospital in Chicago. The paper listed a volunteer appreciation ceremony held nearly 30 years before. One name had been circled in blue ink. Grace Brooks. Olivia froze. Her mother had been named Grace Brooks. She looked again, convincing herself it had to be someone else. The document described Grace as a volunteer recognized for extraordinary compassion while assisting patients and families during a difficult winter. There was nothing remarkable beyond that, yet William had circled only her name. Olivia carefully replaced the paper exactly where she had found it, her heartbeat refusing to slow. Before she could think further, Eleanor entered carrying fresh flowers for the reading room. She noticed Olivia's thoughtful expression immediately. "You look as though you have met an old memory," she said gently. Olivia considered staying silent, but finally asked, "Did William ever live in Chicago?" Eleanor arranged the flowers before answering. "For a short time, many years ago. He rarely speaks about that period." Olivia lowered her voice. "Did he know someone named Grace Brooks?" Eleanor paused. For the first time since they had met, she seemed uncertain whether to answer. After several long seconds, she simply said, "Some names remain close to the heart long after they disappear from conversation." It was not an answer, yet somehow it revealed even more. Late that afternoon, the rain finally stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, covering the gardens with a golden glow that invited Olivia outside. She found herself walking almost instinctively toward the eastern cottage once again. The white lily from the previous evening had been replaced with a fresh one. She sat quietly on the old wooden bench, reading the brass inscription for what felt like the 100th time. Promises outlive the people who make them. Suddenly, she noticed something she had overlooked before. Beside the porch rested a small wooden birdhouse weathered by countless seasons. A tiny brass plate had been attached beneath its roof. Curious, she leaned closer. Instead of a date or dedication, another sentence had been engraved into the metal. She believed every frightened stranger deserved one person who stayed. Olivia whispered the words aloud, feeling an unfamiliar warmth settle inside her chest. Those were not the words of someone remembered for wealth or power. They were the words of someone remembered for kindness. As the breeze gently stirred the maple leaves above her, Olivia realized the mystery surrounding William was beginning to change shape. She had believed she was searching for the reason behind an unexpected marriage. Now she understood she was searching for the story of an extraordinary woman whose quiet compassion had left a mark so deep that even after decades had passed, one elderly man still carried fresh flowers to her memory every single evening. William returned just before sunset, carrying the quiet exhaustion of a man who had spent the entire day solving problems for everyone except himself. As always, he greeted every employee by name before entering the house, thanked the chauffeur for the drive, and paused to admire the blooming roses near the front entrance as though they deserved as much attention as any boardroom discussion. When he stepped into the dining room, Olivia noticed the familiar sadness lingering behind his composed expression, yet there was also something else she had not seen before. It looked almost like acceptance. Dinner unfolded peacefully beneath the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. They spoke about the changing autumn weather, a new art exhibit opening downtown, and the pair of swans that had recently nested along the far edge of the lake. William listened with genuine interest as Olivia described helping prepare care packages earlier that afternoon. The residents smiled before they even opened the boxes, she said. Sometimes people only need to know they have not been forgotten. William lowered his eyes for a brief moment before answering quietly. That is one lesson your mother understood better than almost anyone I have ever known. The room became completely still. Olivia slowly placed her fork on the table. My mother? William looked up, realizing the words had escaped before he intended them to. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, he folded his napkin with deliberate care and rose from his chair. Come with me, he said gently. There was no hesitation in his voice, no attempt to avoid the truth any longer. They walked together through the silent mansion and out into the cool evening air. The familiar path wound between maple trees glowing with shades of amber and crimson until they reached the small cedar cottage where a fresh white lily rested on the porch. William stopped beside the weathered bench but did not sit. Instead, he looked toward the lake where the final light of day shimmered across the water. 31 years ago, he began softly. I came to America carrying success that looked impressive from the outside and emptiness that no one could see. My business had grown quickly. My reputation frightened people before they ever met me. Yet I had forgotten how to trust another human being. His voice remained calm, but every sentence carried the weight of memories carefully protected for decades. One winter afternoon in Chicago, I collapsed from exhaustion while leaving a community hospital after visiting an old business associate. Everyone hurried past because they assumed someone else would stop. Everyone except one young volunteer. Olivia barely breathed. William continued looking across the lake. Her name was Grace Brooks. She stayed beside a complete stranger for hours even after learning I had no family with me. She read to me because she thought silence felt lonely. She brought coffee that had grown cold because she forgot to drink her own while making sure I was comfortable. Before she left, she smiled and said something I have never forgotten. He closed his eyes briefly before repeating the words from memory. Every frightened stranger deserves one person who stays. Olivia felt her heart begin to race. It was the exact sentence engraved beneath the little birdhouse. William nodded slowly, as though he already knew she recognized it. Yes, he whispered. Those were her words. He reached inside his overcoat and carefully removed a small leather wallet worn smooth by many years of use. From it, he unfolded the faded photograph Olivia had secretly discovered inside the library book. He handed it to her without fear or hesitation. This picture was taken the day she convinced me to stop measuring people by influence and begin measuring them by kindness instead. Olivia stared at her mother's smiling face while tears quietly filled her eyes. She had been so young in the photograph, full of warmth and hope exactly as she remembered from childhood. After that winter, William continued, our paths separated. We exchanged letters for several years, but eventually life carried us in different directions. Then one day the letters stopped coming. His voice became almost inaudible. I searched for her many times, but I was always too late. Olivia looked up through her tears. You knew my mother. William finally met her eyes. There was no mystery left in his expression now, only gratitude that had survived 3 decades without fading. She saved something far greater than my future, he said quietly. She reminded me that a man's worth is not measured by the power he holds, but by the people he chooses to protect after he has found it. The evening breeze carried the scent of jasmine through the garden as silence settled gently between them. For the first time since arriving at the Carter estate, Olivia understood that she had never been standing inside a stranger's story. Without realizing it, she had been walking through the unfinished final chapter of her own mother's extraordinary legacy. Olivia could no longer hold back the tears gathering in her eyes. For years she had believed the stories about her mother ended with the small apartment where they had struggled to make ends meet, the endless double shifts, and the quiet sacrifices that Grace Brooks never spoke about. She had never imagined that before becoming her mother, Grace had changed the course of another person's life so completely that decades later, he still carried her memory with unwavering devotion. William waited patiently, allowing the silence to speak before he continued. The evening breeze moved gently through the maple branches above them, scattering golden leaves across the stone path like fragments of forgotten seasons returning home. There is something else you deserve to know, he said at last. After I lost contact with your mother, I hired investigators several times over the years. They always arrived too late. By the time I found an address, she had already moved. By the time I reached another city, she had already begun a different chapter of her life. Eventually I learned that she had passed away, but no one could tell me what became of her family. Olivia lowered her eyes to the faded photograph resting in her hands. You searched for us? William nodded slowly. Not because I believed anyone owed me gratitude. I searched because I still owed her mine. He looked toward the quiet cottage where the porch light had begun glowing softly against the approaching night. Your mother never asked for anything in return. She did not know my reputation. She did not know my resources. She only saw someone who looked alone and decided that was enough reason to stay. Olivia remembered the countless evenings when Grace had insisted on helping elderly neighbors carry groceries, volunteering at church food drives, or sitting beside lonely residents at local care centers after finishing long workdays. As a little girl, she had often asked why her mother spent so much time helping strangers when their own lives were so difficult. Grace had always smiled with the same answer. Kindness grows only when someone gives it away. Hearing William speak, Olivia suddenly realized those words had never been simple advice. They had been the very principles her mother lived by every single day. William reached into the inside pocket of his overcoat once more and removed a thick envelope carefully sealed with dark blue wax. He handed it to Olivia with both hands, almost ceremonially. Your mother wrote one final letter before we lost contact, he explained. It arrived months after she mailed it because I had already left Chicago. I carried it with me ever since. Olivia accepted the envelope carefully. The paper had aged into a soft cream color, but her mother's handwriting remained unmistakable. She traced the familiar curves of the letters with trembling fingertips before looking back at William. Have you read it? She whispered. He slowly shook his head. No, Olivia blinked in surprise. Not once. It was addressed to me, he answered quietly. But I eventually understood it belonged to the future, not to my past. I promised myself that if I ever found her family, they would decide when those words should finally be opened. Olivia stared at him in complete disbelief. For more than 3 decades, he had carried a sealed letter from the woman who had transformed his life without satisfying his own curiosity. That kind of patience seemed almost impossible in a world that demanded immediate answers to every question. Why did you ask me to marry you? She finally asked, her voice barely louder than the rustling leaves. William did not answer immediately. Instead, He walked toward the edge of the lake where the water reflected the first stars appearing in the evening sky. Several months ago, he began softly. My attorneys informed me that a young woman named Olivia Brooks was drowning beneath debts she had never created. When I heard your name, I asked them to investigate only one thing. They confirmed you were Grace's daughter. He paused before continuing. I also learned that every legal solution would take too long. Every financial gift would attract public attention your family did not deserve. Every trust fund could be challenged in court. There was only one path that guaranteed immediate protection under my name and under the law. Olivia felt another wave of emotion rise inside her chest as she finally understood the impossible decision that had changed both of their lives. William turned toward her with quiet sincerity, his eyes reflecting neither pride nor regret. I never searched for a wife, he said. I searched for a way to keep the promise I made to the woman who taught me that compassion is the greatest form of strength. And when I found her daughter standing alone against burdens she should never have carried, I knew that my promise had finally found its way home. The days that followed no longer felt like borrowed time. The weight that had surrounded the Carter estate since Olivia's arrival slowly gave way to something warmer, something neither of them had expected to find. Every evening they shared dinner beneath the quiet glow of the chandeliers, not as strangers bound by an unusual agreement, but as two people connected by the kindness of a woman whose influence had outlived her own lifetime. One crisp autumn morning, William invited Olivia to accompany him to a small law office overlooking the Seattle waterfront. There were no reporters waiting outside, no cameras, and no public announcement. Only William, Olivia, Eleanor, and an elderly attorney who had represented the Carter family for decades. The conference room overlooked Elliott Bay, where ferries crossed the calm water beneath a bright blue sky. After everyone had taken their seats, the attorney placed two folders on the polished oak table. William gently pushed one of them toward Olivia. Before you open it, he said quietly, there is one final promise I must keep. Olivia looked at him with uncertainty as he continued. Our marriage fulfilled the purpose for which it was created. Your debts have been erased. Your brother's education has been fully funded through graduation. A trust has been established to protect your future regardless of anything that happens to me. You are completely free. He paused, allowing the words to settle before speaking again. Inside that folder are legal papers ending our marriage. They require only your signature. You owe me nothing beyond this day. Olivia stared at him in disbelief. She slowly opened the folder and found carefully prepared divorce documents waiting beneath a handwritten letter addressed simply to her. Her vision blurred as tears quietly gathered once more. You are sending me away? She whispered. William smiled with the same gentle kindness that had become so familiar over the past weeks. No, he answered softly. I am giving you back the freedom that circumstances once took from you. A promise should never become another person's prison. The room fell completely silent. Olivia realized that every decision William had made had been guided by the same principle her mother had lived by. Compassion without expectation. Kindness without ownership. She looked down at the divorce papers, but made no attempt to reach for the pen beside them. Instead, she unfolded the handwritten letter. The message was short. Grace once taught me that love is measured by what we protect, never by what we possess. Thank you for allowing an old man to finally keep his word. Olivia closed her eyes as the tears finally escaped. Slowly she stood, walked around the conference table, and stopped beside William. Without saying a single word, she wrapped her arms gently around him. It was not the embrace of a wife holding her husband. It was the embrace of a grateful daughter honoring the man who had spent 31 years carrying her mother's kindness through a world that had almost forgotten it. William hesitated for only a moment before returning the embrace with quiet affection, his eyes glistening beneath the afternoon sunlight pouring through the windows. Eleanor quietly looked away, giving them the privacy that neither had expected to need. After a long silence, Olivia stepped back and smiled through her tears. I think my mother would have been proud of you, she said. William lowered his head, unable to speak for several seconds. When he finally found his voice, it was almost a whisper. Everything good I became began the day she chose not to walk past a stranger. Several weeks later, the small cedar cottage in the East Garden stood with its windows open for the first time in many years. Inside were simple photographs, handwritten letters, and memories carefully preserved rather than hidden. Together, Olivia and William transformed the cottage into the Grace Brooks Community House, a peaceful place where caregivers, volunteers, and families supporting elderly loved ones could rest, share stories, and remember that even the smallest act of compassion could echo across generations. Above the entrance, they placed a simple wooden sign bearing the words Grace had once spoken so naturally that she probably never imagined anyone would remember them. Every frightened stranger deserves one person who stays. Visitors often pause to read the sentence before quietly entering, never realizing that an ordinary volunteer had inspired an extraordinary promise spanning more than 3 decades. And as the seasons continued changing around the peaceful lake, William no longer carried a burden that needed repayment, while Olivia discovered that family is sometimes created not by blood or circumstance, but by the promises that good people refuse to abandon. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like.